Hello and welcome to the Stacking Dingers Show. I'm your host, Matthew, aka Sheep, aka Dark Sheep. Of course, find me online at D4RKSH33P_. And this is your home for all things MLB Best Ball. But we're taking a little detour today. We've got about a week left of the season, and we have a guest who has joined us before to talk a little bit about pitching projections. I am talking, of course, about Derek Carty, the man, the myth, the legend. Welcome, Derek.
Hey, thanks so much for having me on. Appreciate it.
Yeah, so you, of course, are the creator of the Bat and the Bat X, and I wrote down in my notes contributor everywhere because these days you're contributing a little bit everywhere.
Yeah, no, it's accurate.
Yeah, in this world of betting and stuff, I feel like there's a lot of places people can find your daily content, so to speak.
Yeah, there's a ton. I do stuff with ESPN, with Yahoo, with Action Network, with Roto Grinders, EV Analytics, probably several more that I'm forgetting.
Right. I think there's a covers, there's a, yeah. But yeah, so if you want to hear from Derek, he's there on the daily, but we're talking about something brand new that you debuted this year. So in the past, for people who don't know, Derek is the creator of the Bat, and, as he put there in his title, creator of the Bat X now, because for many years, it was the Bat X was only available for hitters. And this year we now have the Bat X for pitchers. So let's talk about that creation, Derek. It's been years since you originally put out the Bat X. So talk about a little bit of what was the difference between the Bat and the Bat X for hitters, and what led into the new Bat X for pitchers now too.
Yeah, so originally the Bat, the original system was just based primarily on traditional stats. I created it 15 plus years ago, before we had StatCast and all this cool new data that we have. So it was built using what we had at the time. Still really good, but once we kind of got this new StatCast data, especially on the hitting side, it was easier to incorporate. We had barrels and exit velocity and launch angles and sprint speed and all kinds of stuff like that. So that's what the Bat X was it incorporated all that new stuff into the projection to make it better, essentially.
And we've seen, obviously, results have been pretty good.
Yeah, they have been.
Yeah, year after year, you're showing up on the lists of best projection systems for the Bat X for hitters.
Yeah, every year, Fantasy Pros runs an accuracy contest of all the different projection systems. In the last 6 years, which is every year the Bat X has existed, it's been first, which is really nice.
It's pretty good. And now, the pitching model is here, and this has been in the works for quite a few years. So, what ended up being the challenges that you faced putting together the new pitching stuff? And then we'll get more into the details, but what are some of the challenges that you face compared to the hitting side?
I mean, there's a lot of challenges on the pitching side because the data is so much more granular. We're working on the pitch level, and there's so many data points that describe how a pitch moves through space, that it's a whole different animal than hitting was, where, especially when we're talking about barrel and exit velocity and whatnot, that's not necessarily on a pitch level. It's more on a event level, like on the batted ball level, which is very different. So on the pitch level, we have all this stuff. We have velocity and movement and spin rate, seam shifted wake. And then, as the years went forward, we kept finding new things, approach angles and seam shifted wake and all this kind of stuff. So anytime there was like a new advancement publicly, I was like, well, I need to incorporate this in here. And in order to kind of account for all of those different variables together in a good way, you really need very complex modeling. You need machine learning. You need something like XGBoost or something, decision trees or something like that, to really account for this type of stuff. And I had never worked with stuff like that before. I'd never worked with the coding language that was required to work with it. So for a few years, I was like, okay, well, let me try to hire somebody else. I'll work with them. I'll tell them what we need to do, and they can kind of do the actual technical aspect of it. And that didn't really work out. I hired a couple of people, and after they strung me along for a little bit, they were kind of just like, all right, this is too complex. Like I'm out. I can't do this. So that set me back, a good couple of years. Then I worked with a company that was really good at it. And they got me a good amount of the way through. And then I decided, all right, I need to take this over myself to really get this where it needs to be. And the advent of AI really helped with that because it sped up the learning process of me actually learning Python coding and learning this machine learning type stuff. And I forget what the original question even was, but
what the challenges, I think
challenges of it. So yeah, I mean that was kind of essentially what it came down to, was having to learn a whole new set of coding and everything. And then by the time I kind of had done that, there were already a bunch of stuff models in existence. When I first started this project, there was nothing out there that was doing this. There was no Stuff Plus, there was no pitching bot, there was no anything. Now that stuff exists, and I'm trying to put my own out there, and it's like, okay, well, I don't want to just rehash what everyone else has kind of already done. I want to make sure that I'm doing things that are going to make it unique and potentially make it better. Because that's always the goal of mine, is to put out, I don't want to put something out unless I believe that it's the best that there is. And I believe that with the new system. So I had to find, I guess, ways that I thought I could make it better or different. And that came in the form of tunneling and bridge pitches and different adjustments that I was making to the data and stuff like that, which, adds more complexity to the process. So ultimately, I think it wound up really, really well. I think I'm very, very happy with how it turned out. I think it's going to help us a lot this year for DFS purposes, for betting purposes, for season-long purposes, for everything. But yeah, it was a long road.
Yeah. So you kind of talked about some of the stuff that you put into it. And, at the core level, the idea of a stuff model is become commonly known. I mean, Stuff Plus is kind of the Saris model. You talked about pitching bot. We've had TJ Stats on here. He has his own stuff models. So, for those that might not know, what exactly is a stuff model?
A stuff model is essentially looking at the physical characteristics of a pitch and determining how good that pitch is based on the velocity, the movement, the spin rate, approach angle, seam shifted wake, tunneling, whatever you want to put into the model. That is essentially what a stuff model is. And I mean, as you can imagine, it tells us a little bit more, and it tells us things much quicker about who a pitcher is and how good he is than just looking at the surface stats, the strikeout rate and the walk rate and the home run rate and everything like that, because we're drilling down and we're looking on the pitch level. And we're looking at the actual, what makes a pitcher effective in a lot of ways. So yeah, that's what a stuff model is.
Yeah. So recently, Eno on his Stuff Plus model had, made some adjustments to kind of the sample area. And he talked about how certain pitches have become more or less effective over time. So how does that then, how do you go about determining, what stuff is important to the stuff model?
I mean, a lot of it comes from just domain knowledge from, I've been in this field for 20 years. I've been doing projections for 15. I went to scout school, so I understand that side of things as well. And just kind of trying as much as you can to understand what should be effective. And then the machine learning really does a lot of that for you. It decides, okay, you give it all these things and it decides, what's important and in what proportion and how relative to all the other stats. And really following along with the public discourse, because there are so many really smart people that are approaching this stuff now, even people that aren't necessarily building their own stuff models, but are coming up with new ways to look at how effective a pitch is, coming up with seam shifted wake or approach angles or whatever. And then trying to understand the physics side of it as much as possible, which I have to give a huge thank you to Dr. Alan Nathan, who's like the premier baseball physicist. His work has been incredible. That was really a big help with me building my own here.
Yeah. So, you've got this layer of stuff at the bottom, and then, kind of what, I don't know, I'll call it pitchability, because I don't know the better word for it. Kind of like how you then go about use it. You talked about bridge pitches and some tunneling, and how your pitches work together, so to speak. That kind of thing. People will say it's good to know what the pitch is going to do, but some pitchers just know how to use their pitches better. And how does that kind of idea work into this already complex system?
So I feel like a lot of the lines we draw between like what is stuff, what is pitchability, what is this, I feel like the lines are a little bit arbitrary. So like some components of that you just talked about, I try to put into the model because we can quantify it, and I think we can put it in there. And so I'm calling it quote unquote stuff. Whether it is actually stuff or not, I don't know. But like you can have a pitch, you can have a slider that if you just looked at the slider, it may not, and you're watching it, even from like a pure scouting perspective, you may watch it and be like, that slider's no good. It's not really doing anything. But if it plays off the fastball really well, it can be an effective slider because of, if you look at, the tunneling of it, maybe it looks like the fastball coming in well into the flight path until it's too late. The batter has to make his decision. And then that's when it kind of deviates up just a little bit and the batter misses it because he thinks it's a fastball, and that can make a pitch effective. So yeah, you want to account for the interactions between pitches. In terms of certain pitchability things like deciding which pitches to throw and sequencing of pitches and that type of stuff, that's much harder to quantify. Game plan type stuff. Am I going to pitch this guy, down and away with these pitches or whatever? Like that kind of stuff is harder to quantify. And even the parts of it that can be quantified aren't as stable as like actual stuff type components. So I'm not necessarily trying to capture pitchability, but I am trying to capture as much as I can quantify about the pitch itself, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and how they relate to each other, that in the ways that you can figure out the number side of things. Yeah, because that's kind of the classic, that guy just knows how to pitch. That you hear that a lot, especially when you're watching a baseball game and you got the old pitcher that's the color commentators. That's kind of the go-to. This guy just knows how to pitch. The wily veteran kind of side of things. And we've seen guys, like Adam Wainwright, in recent history survive a lot longer because of things like that. But, he still had just a really good pitch also.
Yes, he did.
Yeah. So, you've got all this fancy dancy stuff layered on top of it. How much better is it just like looking at like simple thing like K minus BB %, year over year, comparing, this kind of, I'm sure you've done some, back testing, like how much better is it to really drill this deep down into just saying, okay, this guy, he strikes out this many people and walks this many people.
Yeah. So it definitely adds to the accuracy of it. But something like K minus walk rate or individually K percentage or walk percentage, they're really powerful on their own. They just are, But if we're adding in these new things, I think where the power really comes is in smaller samples. So like in the middle of April or in May, strikeout and walk rate aren't going to be like super stable. You don't want to just trust that as opposed to what the guy's done historically. But if his stuff has significantly changed from last year to this year, we're going to be able to believe that a lot faster. And that's going to give us a huge edge in determining who that pitcher is right now in the middle of April after he's only made a couple of starts.
Yeah. I didn't prep you for this one, but, kind of playing off of that, I'll call it the Bobby Miller problem. We have guys that will show up on stuff models that, have like he had 5, and at that point, most of us were looking at stuff plus. Bobby Miller had like 5 good pitches, better than average, your average or better. And, he's still looking for his role on the Dodgers. So, what are some of the dangers of, you talked about being able to go quickly to, changes and stuff, but, are there other dangers that we need to look out for just like relying on this stuff maybe too much?
Well, I mean, stuff is only one component of pitching. It's, I think, the main component. If you were to, break it up into a pie chart or something, I think it would be the majority of it. But there are other components too that are not even attempting to be put in here right now. Pitchability, location, command, sequencing, like all that kind of stuff is not going to be in the projection. That said, no number is ever going to be perfect. The original projections are not perfect. Trying to judge those things subjectively is not going to make you perfect. Like, it is what it is. You account for the things you can account for, and you work with the best numbers that you have. And right now, I think that includes, stuff models. And you accept that you're going to miss some things, but you don't have to be perfect, because in DFS, your opponents are not perfect. The sports books are not perfect. Like, it's just, if you're working with the best data available, and you're working with better data than the next guy is, then that's enough edge, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, I think this season, the guy I think about is Zebby Matthews, the guy who's shown, pretty good pitches, even in the majors, but just hasn't been able to succeed as a pitcher. Yeah, I think that it's interesting that we find these, we find a lot of benefit out of this, but, sometimes there's a few outliers. And I guess, you have any system, you're going to have outliers that don't really, fit the rest of everyone else.
Yeah. And even a guy like Zebby Matthews, like, his peripherals were really good. He had a high BABIP. Is that something that he just got unlucky for half a season of pitching for? Or, is he really that bad at controlling balls in play? Outliers are only outliers. Outliers a lot of times are only outliers over a small sample size until things start to normalize. And then they do what they should do.
Right. The previewing ahead, Andrew Abbott is the the guy that
I hate Andrew Abbott.
When we were talking about pitchers here, I think our guest said it well at that point. Zandamir said he's a guy that's, he's flipped heads 3 seasons in a row.
Yeah, that's the way I view him. I'm sure you're talking about like a coin flip analysis where like, right, he got lucky the one time, he got lucky another time, he got lucky another time. Like, somebody has to get lucky 3 times in a row. I don't believe in Andrew Abbott. Even the stuff model does not believe in Andrew Abbott as a great pitcher. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there is something that we're missing on him, that he really does have great pitchability or something. But I'm not taking any bets on that.
Yeah, I feel like Walker Buehler was also kind of that way in his best years for the Dodgers. He ran some really low BABIPs, and I feel like we saw that eventually come for him.
Yeah, we did. That's a good comparison.
So you've gotten this far. Everybody wants to know, what's next. So we've seen Oopsie come out with Jordan. I'm sure you've talked to Jordan a bit. He added in some newer StatCast data, bat path, bat speed, and now we're talking on that side of things. Closer, not just the event-based hitting kind of stuff, but now starting to talk about that. So, I'm sure you want to sip a few margaritas and take a little bit of break now that you have this model out. But what's next for the Bat and the Bat X?
Yeah, it's the swing level stuff for hitters for sure, and that's something I'm already working on a little bit. So with any luck, it won't be too long before that upgrade comes out. But it'll be the bat acceleration and swing planes and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. As far as what's next in the industry, you kind of talked about it, and it even helped you I'll call it the democratization of coding, just due to some of these AI services. The model itself is using machine learning, but now we have systems out there that are allowing people to kind of skip the learning to code part of it, and you being able to access the modeling stuff by accessing other AI functions to learn that. So, I think I saw a tweet the other day from the guy from Driveline. I'm blanking on the name right now, but he said, anybody that applies should be able to, build models and stuff on their own, just with using these tools that are available for the public. So, how do you feel specifically as someone who spent 20 years, 15 years on doing this, as you see, a lot of systems, not systems, but just people jumping into the space? Obviously, probably, good thing that more people, more brain power, but, what do you see as the future of this whole area, this field?
Yeah, I mean, I'd be a little hypocritical to be upset about it because I use AI. I used it to increase my learning process and help me write certain pieces of code. So I think ultimately it's a good thing. I do think it shouldn't be relied on like the people who don't know how to code at all or don't understand anything about this stuff, and you just try to make something. First, AI can give you errors, so you want to make sure that you understand it enough to at least make sure it's not giving you something bad. And then also, if the data looks off or if there's outlier type stuff or whatever, you want to understand it enough to be able to go in and say, okay, this might be a problem. How can I fix it, or that kind of stuff. So I just think it's easy to just tell AI to make something for you. It's another thing entirely to know that AI has helped you make something really valuable. And I did a lot of back tests when I was building my own stuff model. I compared it against 10 different existing stuff models. And there are varying degrees of quality of these types of things. So just because you have AI build you something doesn't necessarily mean that it's great. It just means AI built you something.
Yeah, I mean, even we saw, it got corrected very quickly, but we saw the pitcher list. They kind of a controversy for a day or two. They fixed it very quickly, but they put out a bot online to start posting post start stuff, model stuff. It's hard to talk about this without saying stuff too many times.
I know.
But it was putting out, and data that didn't make sense, but even those guys there, Kyle Bland, I think is his name,
Bland, yeah.
who's done some amazing work on pitch and hit level type of stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so it's even pretty simple for someone who knows what they're doing to come up with a mistake. And like you said, they saw the mistakes and were able to correct pretty quickly. But you have to be able to see those issues to begin with, and then know what you need to change.
Yeah, exactly. And if you were just somebody who created it using AI and didn't really understand the coding side of it, or even the baseball side of it, like as much as, you know, someone like Kyle Bland does, it'd be very easy to just be like, well, what do I do now? That like you need to have some of that knowledge yourself, to be able to work with the AI to make sure that you're getting something good.
Yeah. So yeah, let's move on a little bit here. So you know, we've got this. This is kind of a question for all models, right? So everybody in the, you know, we talk a lot about underdog best ball here. That's kind of the focus of the show, and for the most part, a lot of people look at, you know, the free systems that are available over on Fangraphs. They take this one number that all, you know, whatever their preferred system is, and they convert it into underdog scoring. And you know, they might look at I feel like at least most people at this point know that, you know, playing time is kind of the biggest variable in those numbers that we see over on Fangraphs. So you know, on top of looking at, oh, this system says this person will score this many points, we also know on a per plate appearance level. I feel like, you know, last time we talked, it was, you know, we talked about the variability of projected plate appearances, innings pitched, and that kind of stuff, and that's kind of, I feel like, been absorbed now into at least most of the people that are really hardcore on in playing this game. But I think the thing that you know, the next question that we all have is, we have this one number, it's a median projection. So like, you know, how do we start to look at projections in terms of range of outcomes, especially in terms of you know, you know, it's popular to look at rookies. You know, we know about the probability of rookies and their hit rate, but you know, how do we start to look at projections more as a range of outcomes instead of just like this one number or a few numbers that we see on Fangraphs?
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot of what you just said. Like, a lot of people think of projections as, okay, they think of projections as a prediction almost. Like, okay, the bat says he's going to hit 32 home runs, so I'm going to expect him to hit 32 home runs. Like, that's the number. But that's not what the projection is even necessarily saying. It's saying that, okay, if you were to look at all the different range of possibilities for what he could do, and you take a weighted average of them, you get 32. But those range of outcomes could be really wide. Especially, you mentioned rookies. Like, for rookies, the range of outcomes is really wide. You know, even an elite prospect can come up to the majors and be Ronald Acuna right away, or he can be Jared Kelenic. Like, there's just, the range of outcomes is everything from superstar to complete bust. And a projection in one number can't really capture that. So it does take a little bit of kind of knowledge of what goes into a projection, and who these players are, and the types of, like, different player types, essentially. And you know, kind of using your brain to figure out, okay, this guy maybe has a wider range of outcomes than another guy does.
Yeah, and you know, on a daily basis, you're doing a lot of betting content, so you know, that kind of goes into looking things on a daily basis too, right? You're comparing one number, you know, your number that the bat is spitting out versus what a book is spitting out.
Yes. Yeah. And I got to trust that mine is right.
Right. So like something like, yeah, you talked about home runs, 32 home runs, you know, you know, how is that built? And even like on a daily basis, right? You're looking for, uh, uh, I don't know, what is the latest numbers that you were attacking, like say last year? Cause I know, you know, for a while books were, you know, we have a mutual acquaintance that used the bad X to make a lot of money on stolen base props. You know, what is kind of like, you know, the layers that, you're looking at now on like a daily basis for trying to interpret a projection versus, a sports book?
I mean, a lot of it is the projection accounts for so much of the different stuff. And a lot of the kind of mental adjustments I was making last year was for high stuff pitchers that I didn't think the system had a good feel for yet, like Chase Burns, Jacob Mizorowski type guys. And now that the Bat X is out with the stuff model in it, that shouldn't be much of an issue this year. So I'm actually really curious to see how this year goes, how many like mental adjustments need to be made. But I think that the system's going to be accounting for a lot of different good stuff now.
Yeah. So I guess, do we just throw out the bat? I remember, talking about how long I've been following you, and your work. But I remember when the Bat X first came out, even in the first couple of years, you were saying, well, don't just throw out the bat. So, where are you at in terms of, we saw the Bat X for hitting catch on pretty quick. We kind of switched over pretty quick. But what is your thoughts this year on looking at the two systems and comparing them?
Yeah, I mean, in theory, and according to back tests, the Bat X should be better than the Bat. It's essentially taking the Bat and it's adding in this new layer of really predictive data. It hasn't been battle tested. Obviously, this is the first year it's coming out. And so if you want to be really conservative, just using the Bat, you can. I mean, the Bat has been great for years. But for me, I'm going to be trusting the Bat X as the superior system and kind of basing most of my stuff off of that.
Yeah, and the Bat X on the hitting side, I know you've built in a lot of things that adjust as the season goes on. The thing specifically I remember you talking about is like the run environment. The Bat X would change. Trying to capture some of the unpredictability of the ball itself, the physical properties of the ball that we've seen change over years. What kind of stuff in the Bat X pitching side of things have you thought of and is kind of built in there that should be changing, as the season goes along?
Well, I mean, when you think about like, or if you know projections, if you've used them before, if you've followed along with them, like they don't change dramatically very quickly, especially on the hitting side. Like it takes a good few weeks, a couple months, maybe more than that, until you really start to notice, okay, the system's treating this guy differently now. I think on the pitching side with the new stuff,
I keep doing it too. It's impossible to not do.
Yeah. We're going to see changes happen very quickly because if a guy's stuff has improved or gotten worse over just one or two starts, it's stable enough where we're going to be able to look at that guy and say, okay, he's fundamentally different now than he was before. And the projection is going to theoretically adjust for that very quickly and start treating him differently very quickly.
Yeah, that's I'm excited for that. That is a criticism I hear of the Bat X often is that it doesn't capture change often enough because it's so based on history and just this player on average over the course of a career and aging curves and all that. That is one criticism that I hear often. People that they say, oh, I know what the Bat's going to say on this guy.
Yeah. And I do think part of that, though, is human bias. Like we've seen this guy be, really good for the last couple of months, and we want to believe that he's different now and whatever. But like the Bat has run all the back tests. It's looked historically at when guys have been good for that amount of time or whatever it is, and it's weighing it the right amount. But it can only work with what data it has. So I think on the pitching side now, having more data that is more stable and where we can make those adjustments really quickly is going to help a lot. But I wouldn't necessarily say that when projections aren't moving quickly that they're wrong, because they're not. I mean, I think they're still the most accurate you can get on it. It's just people want them to move quicker than they than they can sometimes, I think.
Yeah. Everybody, especially in the positive direction, right? We don't see it as much in the negative direction. You talk about a guy who's cold, and you're more likely to say, oh, that guy's just cold, compared to a guy that's hot. You're just saying, oh, no, he's better now.
Yeah, I heard it a lot last year around midseason with Pete Crow Armstrong, when he had like that ridiculous first half, and everyone's like, oh, he's one of the best players in baseball now. Like, clearly he's on the level of like Aaron Judge and Ohtani and like everybody else. And the bat is just like, well, probably not. Like, it looks like he's like pretty good, but not like one of the best. And then in the second half, obviously he regressed. Like, it's just, that's the way it works more often than not.
Yeah. All right, let's bring up the lists. I have a couple of lists here, some tweets that you threw out. I think I'll be honest, I feel like you put this out, it worded in a way to create controversy, because this first tweet that you put out, the top 10 SB in baseball in 2025 according to the stuff metric. The key here was that it was based on stuff alone. Right. So I will say that, I think, we can see the views here. You know what you're doing a little bit to create a little controversy in the tweet space. But we have here the 10 guys, a lot of guys that we would expect. It's more the people that didn't make this list. I think that people were a little bit, we'll say, upset to other degrees.
Yeah, there were a lot of Paul Skeens people that did not like this list.
Yeah, Paul Skeens and Garrett Crochet being the two biggest names that most people, this year it's Skubal, Skeens, Crochet is, I think in all formats, those are the first three pitchers off the board.
Yeah, and this list is not saying that shouldn't be the case. Right. It just was interpreted that way by some people. And Crochet just missed. Crochet was 11 on this list. Skeens' stuff, not just by my stuff model, but by pretty much every stuff model, his stuff isn't elite. He's an elite pitcher, but it comes from I think it comes from really, really good stuff paired with great pitchability, great command, great control. And I think the combination of that makes him one of the best pitchers in the game. Like, if you go look at the BatX's fantasy rankings, it's going to tell you Skeens is the second pitcher you should be taking after Skubal. Even though his quote unquote stuff is only good or great and not like elite.
Yeah. And that's kind of, people are going to look at a list and say, disregard the rest of it because they don't see a Paul Skeens on the top of it. I think the other interesting person here, is Chase Burns there at 5. Yeah. And even Christopher Sanchez at 2. I don't think people really think about him. We saw him be really good last year. The whole all-star snub for number 10, Jacob Mizrowski at the end there. So I guess, what do you think about Chris Sanchez here? Obviously, you were surprised you got put the eyeballs there. What is it that people maybe are missing on him?
I mean, I wasn't expecting to see him second especially in terms of raw stuff. But the system loves his stuff. It is completely buying into him, thinks what he did last year was completely legitimate, improved the stuff quite a bit, and thinks he's one of the best pitchers in the game.
Yeah. And I guess even surprisingly, number 3, DeGrom, we saw him pull, obviously the system exists back in the top DeGrom days, and his stuff is probably number 1 on this list. But a guy that's dialed back his velocity a little bit to try and stay healthy last year, and he's still here, number 3 in terms of, movement and stuff.
Yeah, even though it's not what it was, it's still really, really good. And he probably underperformed his true strikeout rate last year. Like, I would expect him to go back up into the double digits again.
Yeah, and
K per 9.
Yeah, we'll talk about, guys that age and have, learned to pitch, like maybe even on top of, the stuff still being elite. But
Yeah.
let's move on to the other list. I did grab this second one. This is the top 25 SP in baseball right now, according to the BatX projections. One, we see it here. Paul Skeens, number 2, kind of, maybe, I don't know if anybody read this list after the first one, if they're upset about Paul Skeens being missing on the first one. But you talked about it already. The other things that he does, and that the BatX captures says, yeah, he should be number 2. Crochet, on the other hand, is a little bit further behind. Christopher Sanchez, we talked about him, number 3, and I think I'm pretty surprised to see Ohtani at 4. Is there? Let's talk about Ohtani in terms of the pitcher. What kind of upside? Let's say he didn't hit for a year. What kind of upside do you think? Like, if he was just a regular pitcher, does Ohtani actually have?
I mean, he could be the best pitcher in baseball. Like, he's that good. When he first came over from Japan, I was more excited about him as a pitcher than as a hitter. Because he's had the injuries and it's been a couple years, and because he's been so good as a hitter, I think people kind of forget just how freaking good he is as a pitcher too.
Yeah. My friends outside of baseball, they're like, I just keep trying to tell them, like, okay, just watch this guy, just watch what Ohtani's doing. Just become a fan of this, just because this is like historical. This is best pitch. We can have.
It's not like he can do both competently enough to play in the majors. Like, he's one of the absolute best at both, and that's just pure insanity.
Yeah, it's a great time to be a baseball fan in terms of that. Even you might have to get over your hatred of the Dodgers, though.
Yeah, but, I don't have any problem with what the Dodgers are doing the way people do. I think I'm all for it.
Yeah. Zach Wheeler here at 5. We don't, I think that brings up a question of how does now a model factor in health, and how does, if at all, how can you look at a guy and a guy coming off surgery, especially, or a specific injury, how does a projection model account for those sort of ideas?
Not very well. As of right now, I'm not trying to account for injuries at all in projections. It's something at some point I'd like to do, especially because the data on that has gotten better for a number of years. It was like, well, where do you even get injury data from? And now it kind of exists to an extent. So something I'd like to look into. But a guy like Wheeler, if I were to make this list by hand and I were to be like, all right, this is what the projections think, and then I'm going to move guys around a little bit, like, I would be dropping Wheeler quite a bit because he's coming off a thoracic outlet syndrome surgery. And track record on that has not been very good historically. So if you're using the bat for your fantasy drafts, Wheeler is going to project higher than ADP. He's going to project higher than I would actually want to take him. So just keep that in mind.
Yeah. It's interesting that you talk about injury data, because, like, as more and more, I feel like teams have moved on to, like, the kind of, this fatigue monitoring. They're tracking guys, like, all this body data that teams are starting to take. It creates kind of a weird, we're already looking at these players maybe too much as numbers, sometimes too much in our brains, especially as fantasy players, compared to, like, being human beings. But as we layer in, like, this body data, I mean, obviously, if you could get a hold of that, you'd want to use it. But
Oh yeah.
What is your kind of thought on that? As far as people, remembering that these are human beings, not just numbers.
Well, I mean, to the extent that we can measure all that type of biomechanical stuff, it allows us to get closer to measuring what, a human being is. There's always going to be components that we can't quantify. But the more that we can quantify, the better, and the better we're going to be able to make our models. So yeah, I mean, I don't think a lot of that data is public yet, but I'm sure teams are working with it. And at some point, maybe we'll get access to it, and that'll be really cool.
Yeah. Just kind of, I mean, even on a personal level, there's so many people are, sleep tracking is probably the most popular thing, I think, right now. But, I've never really fallen down that well. I don't know if you do any of that of your own personal tracking.
Yeah, I do.
Yeah. Not surprising. You want to know that kind of stuff. But let's talk about Chase Burns here. He's made both lists. He's a top 10 pitcher, not just by stuff. Obviously, last couple of days we've had a lot of reports of varying degrees. His last spring start was shortened, but let's talk about because we don't know really what the Reds are going to do at this point. We're kind of guessing, but let's talk about Chase Burns as just a pitcher, and how does he get into the top 10? After just such a short MLB sample size.
Yeah, I mean, he gets in there because his stuff is just incredible. And in the minors, he was really good. And in his time in the majors last year, he was really good. He had his ERA was like 4.5, but I think if you looked at like his xFIP or his Sierra or whatever, it was like 2.5 or something crazy. Like he was really, really good last year. And he was really good in the minors, and his stuff is some of the best in baseball. He has the best, according to my system, he has the best slider in baseball. He throws, he sits almost 100 miles per hour. And yeah, so when you combine the stuff in there, it thinks he's one of the best pitchers in baseball. That is on if he's healthy per inning kind of basis. This year there are injury concerns with him, especially after what's happened the last couple of days. There's concerns that he might not start the year in the majors. There's concerns that, they might keep him on a pretty strict pitch count. Maybe he's only throwing 75 or 80 pitches per game this year, even if he is healthy. So there are other things to consider with him from a fantasy perspective, but from just a pure talent level perspective, yeah, Chase Burns is one of the top 10 pitchers in baseball.
Yeah, you talked about sitting 100. We saw, I think, kind of popular list going around year over, I think it took the 2024, top fastball velocity, and it was slowly getting crossed out as, these guys were injured. So the list shrunk from year, 2024 to 2025 because they were all getting injured. We kind of talked about injury already, but, so I know it's not really in there, but I guess what's your thought on some of these guys that, have this massive velocity and, trying to stay healthy?
It's not something we have enough data on yet where I'm like, really like, yeah, we have to avoid these guys. It's piqued my interest. It's something I'd like to study more myself. For now, my concern with Burns is less that he's throwing hard. I mean, that is part of it, but also just that he had an arm issue last year, and that tends to not be a good thing for guys in the future a lot of times. But again, something I'd really like to study and quantify if I can, looking at historically, like what happens to guys with this type of injury, what do they wind up doing in the future?
Yeah, I think, in terms of fantasy, there's a couple adages that people have for pitchers. One, I don't want a pitcher that's already hurt. And two, I think the newer one this year is definitely looking at, I don't maybe not want a guy that was hurt last year, especially in terms of specific, forearm strains and those kind of scary things that even though they might be healthy now, even last year, people are starting to look at that a lot more.
Yeah, and we saw it with Hunter Green. Apparently, he was having issues in his last few starts last year, and nobody knew about it. So I drafted him in my labor league this year, and that wasn't very fun to find out 2 days later that he's hurt and is going to miss half the year.
Yeah. Yeah, that's been a blow to a lot of people because I mean you have a number 9 here, but I think for years people have been saying Hunter Green, he gets that 180, 200 innings, he has Cy Young upside.
Yeah. And his stuff even improved quite a bit last year compared to previous years. Like I was pretty high on Green coming into this year, and then we find out he was hurt last year, just kind of hoped that the offseason was going to fix it, and it didn't. And now he's getting surgery. Like it's a frustrating situation.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to jump down to Dylan Cease, number 14 here, a guy who got a huge contract from the Blue Jays, and this you learned a lot about what kind of how deep people were in on statistics by how they thought about the Dylan Cease contract.
Yeah.
Obviously, he's 14 here, so the system likes him, but a little bit. What do you think on that contract that he got, and which what does Dylan Cease need to do to just like put together a good season or a great season?
I mean, he just needs to be himself, I think, just not get unlucky, which I think a couple of the past 3 years he has. So I think he's really good. I think the stuff is really good. I think the peripherals are really good. I think he's just gotten, bad BABIP luck or bad left on base percentage luck or that kind of stuff. And that tends to normalize. So even when you look at my stuff system, which is actually, we think about stuff in terms of just like swings and misses, but it's also like my stuff system is projecting, how good they are at preventing hits on balls in play or preventing home runs or that kind of stuff too. It doesn't see Cease as a guy who should struggle with his BABIP.
Okay. I know you did say, I forget where I read it, but the new Bat X pitching stuff helps you feel more confident about projecting BABIP. So for people who might not totally, they've heard BABIP, they know it's related to luck, but what about the Bat X makes you feel more confident about BABIP, and maybe a little bit about why it wasn't before?
Well, I mean, for years in the sabermetric space, the theory was like pitchers can't control BABIP. It's just lucky or unlucky, anyone who deviates from average. And then over the years, we started to realize, okay, like there are some pitchers that have a level of control over this, but we don't necessarily know who they are until we get a big sample size. We can maybe know a little bit based on their batted ball tendencies, their fly ball rate, their ground ball rate. But now when we can dig even deeper and we can look on the pitch level and we can say, okay, this type of pitch tends to reduce balls, hard contact or whatever it is, hits on balls in play. Now we can feel more confident in the projection about it because it's looking at the actual characteristics of the pitch that tend to drive higher or lower BABIPs.
Okay. So yeah, the specific pitches you can now know that historically what kind of stuff it does. So that's interesting because that's comparing ERA to xERA, ERA to SIERA. We kind of have these models for not like complex models, but as fantasy players, we have these simple models for looking at trying to find guys who are lucky or unlucky. So BABIP being one that we kind of use in that way. So you're saying that maybe there is a little more control even than what we expect.
Yeah, definitely.
All right. I would be remiss not to talk about Jose Soriano. He is a guy that is going in the last round of underdog drafts. So round 20, everyone else here is going a lot earlier. So, what is it about Jose Soriano that gets him into the top 25 pitchers in baseball right now? And how much can we trust that?
So I was very surprised to see him on the list, as I'm sure just about everybody was. And it should be noted that this is a list for real life purposes, not for fantasy. So he is a much better real life pitcher than he is a fantasy pitcher because he doesn't strike out a ton of guys. But he also gets a billion ground balls. He had the highest ground ball rate in baseball last year. He had his sinker profiled by the Backcast for like a 75% ground ball rate. And I think all of his other pitches, aside from the four-seamer, all profiled for like a 60% ground ball rate. Like he gets a ton of ground balls, and he's good enough to also get a decent amount of whiffs, a decent amount of strikeouts. Like you don't see guys a lot of times who are super elite ground ball guys who are also above average with strikeouts. And when you pair the two of them, that's really powerful. And so I think Soriano is actually one of the more interesting case studies in baseball right now. But I kind of buy it. Like he doesn't have the type of stuff that we think about when we think of stuff usually, the big, I guess he kind of does. He throws hard, but like when we think of guys who have stuff, we think of, like the guys who are blowing the ball by everybody and generating swings and misses left and right. And Soriano's not really doing that. But his stuff is really good at other things that are important for pitching, at generating ground balls specifically. So, preventing home runs. And so I think Soriano's a really good pitcher. Without that strikeout rate, you're not taking him this high in a fantasy league, but you are probably going to get a good ERA out of him.
With Jose Soriano, I think we have a certain set of biases. So when we're talking about fantasy pitchers, a lot of the times we're trying to guess wins and stuff, wins, quality starts, the kind of things that come from team aspects. And so I don't want to just specifically talk about the Angels as a team supporting Jose Soriano, but I think we have biases in terms of pitching development by teams, in terms of players. The Angels being, maybe there's one good fantasy pitcher there, but they haven't really, developed a guy in a while. Whereas like the Brewers now, often, it was the Rays, the Guardians for a while. We talk about pitching systems. So I guess, how do you think about that in terms of just kind of the development of teams and pitchers in terms of a model? And I'm guessing you're not totally trying to capture that, but how do you account for the team aspect of things?
Yeah, I'm not explicitly trying to capture that. I think to an extent, it's going to be implicitly captured just by the stuff models. Like if teams are developing guys a certain way, teaching them certain pitches, or making certain pitches more effective, like that's just going to be captured by the stuff model.
Okay. Yeah, because like I think it's a popular thing, like especially the Brewers. They have a few injuries on their staff this year. They bring in Quinn Priester last year and turn him into kind of this miraculous thing. He doesn't project as well as his results last year. I guess so that kind of leads me to the question of, we talked about Andrew Abbott, but how do you, and maybe you already answered it in stuff models, maybe being able to capture it now quicker, but this kind of general idea of, the Brewers now have Kyle Harrison, just as an example. They're probably going to do something different with him this year, and he's going to be good.
Yeah, before the season, it's tough to know. It's a little bit conjecture. It's a little bit, knowing, okay, this is a team that has a track record of changing guys and making them better. From a season-long perspective, that kind of sucks because we don't know necessarily like how to project a guy like that, especially because once he makes a start or two, we're going to have a really good idea about who he is and what kind of changes they made. But until the season starts, we can't really quantify that.
Yeah. All right. Anything else that I've failed to ask you about the new pitching system that you really want to highlight?
No, I think we pretty much covered it.
Excellent. All right. So there you go, guys. Hopefully that helps clear maybe some questions you had about pitch modeling and maybe some general projection stuff. So, Derek, thank you again, as always, for joining us. We really appreciate you taking some time to talk to us.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much for having me.
All right. So, those of you out there, we have a week left to go fill some drafts. So, hopefully, you're not all burnt out yet, but we will be here. We'll be holding your hand till the end. A couple more episodes before the season starts. But in the meantime, go out there and enjoy these last few days of drafting. Pretty soon, we're going to flip all the cards over and we're going to find out everything we were wrong about. So, for Derek and myself, thank you for watching, and go fill some drafts.